Hello there. Today we're going to have a look into one of the new features that is coming up, and that is a feature that will enable people to either hide or either to show embedded data from Microsoft from SharePoint embedded, which is by default hidden, and the same goes for content that has been archived using Microsoft 365 archiving. By default, that is hidden from search, but we have some options where we can actually turn that toggle and make it visible in PnP Modern Search. The request you see is here, and what we have right now is a running version that is not yet published. But we hope that it might be released sometime before New Year. So let's have a look at what happens here. We have a number of sites that have been archived using Microsoft 365 Archive. And by default, for end users, you won't be able to see them. Admins can search the content, but common users cannot. And that's by design. That's the way it works right now. End users will, at some time next year, be able to search these items as well, but that is something that's still in the pipeline. As far as SharePoint embedded goes, this is a more like a developer centric thing, but we still want to make it possible for people to surface that content in PnP Modern Search because, well, you could write your own web parts that actually shows these files, but why reinvent the wheel again when we have PnP Modern Search already available? So let's have a common scenario here. This is some kind of document management system, and we have two categories of files here. We have those which have been archived and which those that has not yet been archived. In this case, the out of the box experience, the one we expect to be the most common is that we have the archived stuff sort of like hidden a little bit away from end users because, well, there's a reason why they have been archived. But it's done, sometimes it's still available to be able to see that they exist. So we have a common scenario here where we have set this up using a search vertical. We have one for non-archived stuff and one for archived stuff. This result web part shows the non-archived items, which is just as you would expect. We are just, in this case, I'm just showing is document equals one or contains one, which will just show any kind of document that is in the system. You can of course refine that further, but that will by default not show any kind of archived content because that is by default hidden. We're using SharePoint Search in this case. We could also have been using Microsoft Search. It doesn't really matter that much. So this is what we are used to. That's what we already have in many cases in our system. The other web part down here, which is the one that shows the archived content, is a little bit different. We're using Microsoft Search. That's required. You can't show archived content using the Microsoft Search data source. So we have to use the Microsoft Search option. And in this case, we show drive items. And we have two new toggles down here. We have a toggle that will allow us to show SharePoint embedded content. And we have one that will allow us to show content that's been archived using Microsoft archiving. So in this case, we've toggled that on. And as you can see up here, we now have 170 results that's showing up. You will notice that we don't get the preview, for instance, and so on and so forth for these cards. That's because the layout, the mapping of the fields that we have is not identical. So that's something you have to set up yourself before you release this to your end users. If you want to use that layout, then you have to map those fields, because as you see, for which is general for all of the Microsoft search options, we don't have that many out of the box managed properties, so we'll have to enter them ourselves. We can't just rely like we can on the SharePoint side. We can't rely on that we get a list of all of them and then we can put a check mark in those that we want. So in this case, if we want another one, we will have to type it in here. For instance, is archived. It's already there, so it doesn't really matter. But in this case, that is a managed property that we would like to get returned from the backend. So in this case, we will have to enter it ourselves. But as you can see, it actually works straight out of the box. The only thing we have done is we have selected on the second web part that it is using Microsoft Search, and we've enabled that toggle that shows we want to see archived content as well. Again, it's important to notice this follows the same rule as we have always followed. You can only see the content that you have access to. So if you didn't have access to that file when it wasn't archived, you still don't have access to that file when it's archived. So as you can see, we have our non-archived stuff, and with which way so we get our archived stuff. As you might expect, we have the URL to the content, but when I try to click on it, it comes up with, well, you can't do that because it's archived. So this message will change eventually, and it will enable us to put in a URL to, for instance, your help desk system or whatever, so the end user can request that this content is unarchived, so it becomes available again for the end user. Another scenario that we have been discussing internally is that a situation where we want to show both archived and non-archived content together, like in this case. In this case, we want to show all the content, and then we want to somehow indicate that a specific file has been archived. Right here, we have just a very common scenario where we have going to the configuration. We're using Microsoft Search because we are dealing with archived content in some cases, and therefore we have to use Microsoft Search. That's a precondition. We're looking for drive items. Drive item is the same as files in the language of the graph. So therefore, we are not looking for files. We're looking for drive items. Well, that's the way it works. In this case, we have toggled on both SharePoint Embedded and Archived. The reason is that we want to show both those that have been archived and those that are not archived. This one will by default just show all the archived stuff, but we also want to show something that is not archived, so therefore we have to use both of these together. That sort of like negates that and makes it show us all content. That's behind the scene stuff. So in this case, we are showing both, and we are not specifying anything specific up here. We just show all the drive items. The only thing that we have changed is that in this list of properties, we also have is archived on the list. As you might have expected or have seen before, when we're dealing with Microsoft Search, we don't get a list where we can sort of like select the managed property we want. In this case, I had to do like two symbols to add it by typing. In this case, now it's available as well. And it will be sent to the backend as in part of the request that we want this field called is archived to be returned from the backend. That is the way it works when we're dealing with that. If you are working with this and want to sort of like debug how it actually works, I recommend using the Graph Explorer. That is a pretty nifty tool for that. So let's do that. In this case, I have added that is archived property, and we can see that I've also changed the layout. We're using a details layout in this case, just for the sake of this demo, and we have added a additional column called is archived. As you saw before, the field now exists in here, and if you can't really see what's going on in this one, I recommend, that's sort of like a hack. If you minimize the window, you will be able to see that the various options that we have available here. Right now, I have actually disabled that is archive flag because I entered it again. So let's just return to the normal size. Go back on pane 1 and see in here is archived. Let's add that again. So now when we requested something from the backend, that field is returned to us. So that's why it now shows up. You can see it over here. That's on some of these items we actually have the value is archived. The task that we have right now for you is that you should, well, that's my opinion anyway. Right now, you should in some way make it visible for the end user that the stuff that they're looking at right now, whether it's archived or not archived. In this case, where we use this layout, it's pretty obvious because we have a column called is archived. But of course, if you're dealing with a card layout or anything similar, list layout, for instance, I recommend that you take a look at how can you change the layout in such a way that it's obvious that it has been archived. You could put in a padlock icon somewhere on the display template or in the layout, or you can, for instance, put a watermark on it, or you can change it to another color. So green or red or whatever. So that's another way to do it, so that you can show both archived and non-archived content together, but it doesn't trick the user, because in normal cases, when we open a document, we expect the document to open. When we click on the link to an archived item, then it comes up with this warning saying that this content has been archived, and we can request access to have it unarchived again by our admins. So I recommend that you have a look at how you can actually change the templates, and we might provide some examples on that as well. We have a repository called PnP Modern Search Layouts, which is just a sample repository where we show various designs that we have made. So just for inspiration. So perhaps you can find something there within a short time, because this might be pretty useful in many scenarios that as we expect Microsoft archiving to become more and more common. Right now, it's not that common, but as we see a lot of people running out of SharePoint storage, that makes it a good idea. And also, Microsoft archiving is an excellent way to actually hide content from your Copilot, because when you archive content, it becomes unavailable for Copilots. So that's an easy way to sort of like make sure that your Copilot only is working on relevant data and current data, rather than on old stuff that should have been out of scope anyway. So that might be a good idea as well.